In the middle of Vort, actually, I normally don't like to end the shir in the middle of a Vort, but I was discussing a machshava from the Meshech Chochmah, and his question was that, you'll remember, we have a machlokes between the tzdukim and the prushim. If Shabbos in the pasuk, mimacharas Shabbos, means the day after Saturday, or the day after the first day of Pesach, the tzdukim took the position that you start counting the omer on a Sunday. Those are the Sadducees. The prushim take the position that you start counting the omer the second day of Pesach, whatever day that is. Sometimes it is a Sunday, but and the like. And obviously, the halacha of the Torah Shebaal Peh is that we start counting on the second day of Pesach. So the question becomes obvious: why does the Torah call Pesach Shabbos? Why does it refer to Yom Tov as Shabbos? Why didn't the Torah just give me a date? So we were makdim. We didn't really answer the question yet, but we were makdim with the Meshech Chochmah's point that there are two halachic differences between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Difference number one is Shabbos does not have a heter of ochel nefesh for food preparation, and Yom Tov does, right? You're allowed to cook, you're allowed to carry, you're allowed to do various things that, even if it's not food, that enhance the simcha of Yom Tov. Actually, it's quite complicated, really, because certain things you cannot do on Yom Tov, but Yom Tov has heterim of ochel nefesh that Shabbos does not have. This is called ochel nefesh. This is difference number one. Difference number two is the holiness of Yom Tov emanates from the Sanhedrin acting on behalf of the people by their sanctification of Rosh Chodesh, meaning even if they sanctify the wrong day as Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov is based on X number of days from the erroneous Rosh Chodesh, right? That's the famous Mishnah, where according to Rabbi Yoshua, the Sanhedrin miscalculated when Rosh Hashanah should have been, and Rabbi Gamliel ordered Rabbi Yoshua to come to him on the day that, according to Rabbi Yoshua, would have been Yom Kippur, come with his money and with his staff. And Rabbi Akiva told him, even if they're wrong, Yom Kippur is defined by the day that they sanctified. And according to Ramban, even Bisman Hazeh, where we don't have a Sanhedrin, the only reason we keep Yomim Tovim is Hillel Hasheni. Right, he was a great, many generations after the original Hillel, who was considered to be the last Nasi of a functioning Sanhedrin that had been abolished by the Romans. Shortly thereafter, he was the one, together with the Sanhedrin, who established the Jewish calendar, and all of the Roshei Chadashim were sanctified in advance, meaning we don't keep the Yomim Tovim because of astronomy. We keep the Yomim Tovim because of the sanctification of the Sanhedrin, even the ones that we keep today. And that is why the holiness of Shabbos comes from God, the holiness of Yom Tov comes from us, and that is why on Shabbos the bracha is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos, blessed art you Hashem who sanctifies the Shabbos. On Yom Tov it's Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim, he sanctifies Klal Yisrael, who has the koach to sanctify the time. So these are two chilukim between Yom Tov and Shabbos. Chiluk one is ochel nefesh versus not ochel nefesh. Chiluk number two, Yom Tov, we make the kedusha. Shabbos, Hashem makes the kedusha. The Meshech Chochmah then proceeds to say that these two distinctions are because of a third distinction. Meaning a third distinction will explain the first two distinctions. And that is, Shabbos commemorates an event that had nothing to do with the Jewish people. Shabbos commemorates that God made the world in 6 days, and God rested on the seventh day. There were no Jews around. That had nothing to do with Klal Yisrael. The message of Shabbos is a universal message, even though only Jews have to keep Shabbos, or even are allowed to keep Shabbos, but the message overall is universal. And therefore, Shabbos is something whose existence does not depend on us in any way. That's why Shabbos does not bend to our uses. Meaning Shabbos is not batel to my need to cook or my need to have food. Because Shabbos represents an idea that has no direct shaykhus to me. In fact, the Meshech Chochmah says that's why Shabbos is described as a matana tova, a beautiful gift that Hashem gave us. Why is Shabbos called a matana? Because a matana is when you get something you didn't earn and don't even deserve. In other words, logically, Shabbos should apply to Jew and Gentile alike. There's no particular reason why only the Jews should have Shabbos. And yet, Hashem gave us Shabbos as a matana tova. But since the message of Shabbos has no direct connection to the historical events of the Jewish people, number one, it does not bend to our needs, i.e. ochel nefesh. And number two, we are not masters over its sanctification. By Yom Tov, on the other hand, at least the Shalosh Regalim, I'll talk about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur after that. The Shalosh Regalim only exist because there's a Jewish people. Pesach is a Yom Tov because God took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. Shavuos, that's coming up, is a Yom Tov only because God gave us the Torah. Sukkos is a Yom Tov because God took us to the desert for 40 years and we had the clouds of glory. If there wouldn't be a Jewish people, there wouldn't be those Yomim Tovim. Those Yomim Tovim exist only because of us. So if a Yom Tov exists only because of us, only because of the unique relationship Hashem has with the Jewish people, that is why Yom Tov bends to our ochel nefesh needs. And einachinami, by the way, you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for a non-Jew. In other words, Yom Tov bends for the Jewish people because Yom Tov exists only because of us. Since without us there wouldn't be Yom Tov, Yom Tov is nullified to our needs. And einachinami, not to the needs of a non-Jew. The well-known halacha that raises a lot of problems. The Gemara says in Maseches Beah that you are allowed to invite a goy to a Shabbos meal. You're allowed to. May not be the best idea, but halachically you can invite a goy to a Shabbos meal, but you're not allowed to invite a goy to a Yom Tov meal. Why is that so? On Shabbos, you're not allowed to cook, so you invite a goy. You're not going to do cooking on Shabbos. But on Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. But you're only allowed to cook for a Jew. You're not allowed to cook for a goy. So the Chachamim made a gezerah that you're not allowed to invite a non-Jew to a Yom Tov meal lest you come to cook extra food for the goy that you're not allowed to. So again, be sure you understand this. Cooking for a goy is an Isser D'Oraisa on Yom Tov. The Drabanan is don't invite him even if you're not planning on cooking because of a gezerah lest you will come to cook for the goy. Now this halacha, again, it's not really I'm not going to give a whole share on this halacha, but this halacha is a very, very problematic, very difficult halacha in many, many ways. Number one, unfortunately, because of the scourge of intermarriage, sometimes a person might have siblings, might have children, in which the spouse is a non-Jew. Now, I want to invite my children to my house for Yom Tov. That's a way of being makarev them, of keeping up some connection with Judaism. Now, they're obviously not going to go without their non-Jewish spouse. So am I allowed to have the non-Jewish spouse over on Yom Tov? Shabbos for sure you could. But am I allowed to have the non-Jewish spouse over, given the halacha that you don't invite a goy to your house on Shabbos? So again, the truth of the matter is, without getting into all the technicalities, the poskim bend over backwards to be lenient. This is a particular halacha in which all sorts of leniencies are made. Some are lenient as long as you did all of your cooking before Yom Tov, so there's no possibility of cooking on Yom Tov. They matter it. Others say that if you're only inviting the spouse because of the Jewish person, you're not really inviting the spouse, you're just inviting the Jew, and you're doing what you need to get the Jew over. So there are differences. Again, if anyone has, and of course the same shaila, by the way, is not just intermarriage, but let's say you have a non-Jew who's in the process of converting to Judaism. Now, one of the ways they learn is by experiencing Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Shabbos is no problem. I can have the non-Jew at my house for Shabbos. I just got to worry about the wine, but yayin mevushal, not going to be a problem. But how can I do it on Yom Tov? Right. So once again, there are different heterim. But the point basically is, going back, why is there a heter of ochel nefesh on Yom Tov? Because Yom Tov is because of us, and therefore it bends to us. Why are we in charge of sanctifying Yom Tov? Once again, because without us there's no Yom Tov. So the Meshech Chochmah says, we start off with two chilukim between Shabbos and Yom Tov, ochel nefesh and source of sanctity. And those two chilukim are explained by a third chiluk, that Shabbos did not come into existence because of us. Shabbos predated us, as opposed to Yom Tov, that only comes into existence because of us. Therefore, Yom Tov bends to our needs in terms of Eichel Nefesh, and Yom Tov, we are the source of the Kedusha, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim. Okay, so now, if we understand that Shabbos is something we didn't earn, we're not masters over, and Yom Tov is something which is based on our particular connection to God, of all of the Yamim Tovim, the closest to Shabbos is Pesach. Why? Because of the following. On one hand, it is of course true that without the Jewish people there would be no Pesach. Pesach is because of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So that's why it's a Yom Tov. But it is a Yom Tov that we really didn't earn and we didn't deserve. We should have been in Mitzrayim for 400 years. But Hashem took us out after 210 years, 190 years early, because we had reached the 49th level of impurity, and had we stayed even another minute, the amount of time it takes for dough to rise, we would have hit level 50, and that would have been it. So we were not deserving of redemption. Hashem took us out at a time that we hadn't earned it. We weren't roy lekach. And therefore, the same way that Shabbos is a matnas chinam, a matana that we didn't deserve, Pesach too is a matana that we didn't deserve. Unlike Shavuos, that we earned it through the counting of the Omer and the perfection of the Madregos, La'at Li'at, and even Sukkos that came in the aftermath of the tshuva of Yom Kippur, which in a sense we earned. Pesach was given to us as an unearned matana, and that's why it is called Shabbos. Now, it's interesting. I would just add a little bit. I don't think the Meshech Chochmah says this. The heter of Eichel Nefesh, the statement in the Torah that you're allowed to do food preparation on Yom Tov, where does that pasuk appear? It actually appears in the holiday of Pesach, and we then learn out the other Yomim Tovim from Pesach. So you might ask, why did the Torah choose to teach me the heter of Ochel Nefesh on Pesach? like this explanation, it's very beautiful. Because Pesach is the biggest chiddush, meaning the Yomim Tovim that we earned by our Avodah, of course it's going to bend for us. But if the Torah would have told me, Ochel Nefesh is mutter on Sukkot, or Ochel Nefesh is mutter on Shavuos, I wouldn't have known Pesach. Because Pesach would have said we didn't deserve it. So it's not going to yield to us. So the Torah needed to tell me, even Pesach, which is a getter of matnas chinam, a getter that's somewhat similar to Shabbos, there's still going to be a heter of Eichel Nefesh, and Kal V'chomer, the other Yomim Tov. Yeah.
What about the Rashi that explains that when not eating matzah is because it's Pesach, and then we have the Moedim before they were given to the Jews?
I'm sorry, say it again?
What about the Rashi explaining why it's not eating matzah?
Why Lot was eating matzah. Yeah. So again, part of that answer is that the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they with Ruach HaKodesh, they were keeping the Torah before it was given, and since Lot had been raised with Avram in Avram's home, so Lot received the Masorah from Avram. But that was simply a prophetic revelation, not to Lot, but to Avram, regarding what the mitzvahs would be in the future. But it was not mandatory. It was something they did on their own. Okay? Now, I just want to mention a little bit of a question that I have, though. And that is this idea, the Meshech Chachma is saying, Ochel Nefesh is permitted on Yom Tov because Yom Tov comes because of us. That is true for Pesach, even though Pesach is a matnas chinam, Shavuos, and Sukkot. When it comes to, and Yom Kippur, of course, you don't cook, so there's no heter of Ochel Nefesh on Yom Kippur. But I think there is a problem about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, you are allowed to cook, right? Rosh Hashanah also has a heter of Ochel Nefesh. The question is, what is uniquely Jewish about Rosh Hashanah? Yeah, only the Jewish people were given Rosh Hashanah, but that's also true for Shabbos, right? We're not asking, of course it's a Jewish ritual. But the question is, what is uniquely, how is Rosh Hashanah bound up to the unique history that Hashem has with the Jewish people? What happened on Rosh Hashanah? Adam HaRishon was created. And because that is the anniversary of the creation of man, that becomes the day of judgment. And it's also the day of coronating Hashem, because Hashem became a melech with the creation of mankind. Because only man has bechira. Melech means someone chooses to coronate the king. Now, yes, it was given to the Jewish people, but conceptually, it is not historically connected to the Jewish people. It's just like Shabbos. So my question is, if the Meshech Chachma is saying that since Shabbos represents a pre-Am Yisrael event, it does not bend to Am Yisrael, so could I not have made the same argument by Rosh Hashanah? It represents a pre-Am Yisrael event. So my question is, which I don't really have an answer for, why, of course there is a heter, don't get me wrong, but why is there a heter of Ochel Nefesh on Rosh Hashanah? Shouldn't Rosh Hashanah be like Shabbos? That's a little bit of a question. You might answer, but I don't know if it's a good answer. The Derech Hashem has a whole arichos that originally it was God's plan that Adam and the whole human race that would come from Adam would be given the task of bringing godliness into the world. And eventually the different offshoots of Adam proved to be unworthy, so God eventually had to focus on the particular branch of Avraham, which then branches off to Yitzchak, which then branches off to Yaakov and the Shvatim. Which means Yaakov and the Shvatim took over the mission that was originally entrusted to Adam. In fact, that's the meaning of the saying that is often misinterpreted or intentionally distorted by anti-Semites, the statement, Atem kruyim Adam. You, the Jewish people, are called Adam. And the Ovdei Kochavim, the idolaters, are not called Adam. So the anti-Semites, they know all these Gemaras very well. Somehow they always learn all of these Gemaras and say, the Talmud says non-Jews are animals and are subhuman. Well, I can't deny that is a possible interpretation of the words. I mean, it's not outlandish in terms of translating the words, but the real interpretation is very different. Adam is a proper noun, not a common noun. It doesn't mean you are human and they're not human. That's not what it means. It says you are taking the role of Adam Harishon, and they do not have the role of Adam Harishon, like the Derech Hashem explains. Adam was given a mission, and Hashem took that mission eventually and gave it to a particular offshoot. Now, so it could be, I'm just thinking out loud, that if Rosh Hashanah is the commemoration of the creation of Adam Harishon, and it is we who took over the job of Adam Harishon, so we treat Rosh Hashanah as connected more to us than to the nations of the world, because we are doing Adam Harishon's job. I don't know, just a machshava, why Rosh Hashanah might fall under the category of a Jewish day more than non-Jewish. But Lamais, I'll tell you the truth though, in terms of Day of Judgment, I mean, a simple question, are non-Jews judged on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah? It seems to be that they are, which is an interesting question. So why isn't there some Noahide observance? I mean, if something big is happening to them, it would seem that they ought to do something about it. Okay, don't blow shofar, that's another thing, but whatever it is, if something is happening to them on that day, why do they ignore it? Yeah.
And why is it that it's not because we're coronating Hashem as the king?
That might be so, but once again, though, the problem is that the coronation is a consequence of the day that we were created, meaning on our birthday, we acknowledge God as the king. So it's still connected. That's a universalistic event. That was not, in other words, it's not because of anything that happened to us, unlike Pesach, Shabbos, Sukkot.
If we take Shavuos very literally, in that the world would have been destroyed if we didn't accept the Torah, then the creation of the world is actually reliant upon us.
Okay, that's an interesting point, that the world was created, whatever it is, 5,783 years ago, conditional on what we did, therefore, okay, that's a good answer. That actually is a good answer also. And therefore, the celebration of creation is because of the Jewish people accepting the Torah. Now, yeshkoach, that's a good answer. Okay. All right, so now the Meshech goes back and says, since Pesach is a Shabbos-dik Yom Tov, because we didn't really deserve it, we really didn't earn it, that's why it's called Shabbos. Okay. So that's the end of the Meshech Chochmah. So now I want to take the Meshech Chochmah, go a little further with it. Okay, so Shabbos means second day of Pesach. Oh, I'm sorry. Shabbos means first day of Pesach. Mimachras Shabbos is second day of Pesach. Question. A new question. Why do we start counting the Omer the second day of Pesach? That's a little odd. Logically, we ought to start counting the Omer the first day of Pesach. Let me explain why. The Sefer HaChinuch explains, and I think I've mentioned this more than once, that the inyan of Sfiras HaOmer is to link the holiday of freedom with the holiday of Torah, so that we understand that freedom is not worthwhile unless it is connected to doing the Ratzon Hashem. Pesach and Shavuos are one long holiday, and the Omer period is almost like a Chol HaMoed, the Ramban says. In other words, we don't want to celebrate freedom as a value in and of itself. Freedom is so I can serve Hashem. Freedom is not that I should be free. And that's why we have the Omer, where in the middle of Pesach, we start counting towards Shavuos. This is what the Sefer HaChinuch says. So the question is, in fact, the Gemara says as well, that's why the korban of the Omer on Pesach, which is pure freedom, is barley. Barley was typically fed to animals. Freedom is just animal freedom. Shavuos, it's wheat, human consumption. Because going from Pesach to Shavuos is going from animal to human. So with that background, the question is, if it's so important to underscore that freedom has to be connected to Torah, service of Hashem, then why not count the Omer from day one? In other words, day one at the first Seder, I should count the Omer. Right? In other words, this is the second kasha. Right? Our first question, which we said from the Meshech Chochmah, is why is Pesach called Shabbos? Now we're asking another question. Why is Sefira mimocharas HaShabbos? Why not on the first day? Especially in light of the Sefer HaChinuch, that you're linking freedom with Torah. By the way, that explains why the holiday of Shavuos is called in the Mishnah Atzeres. So Atzeres in the Mishnah is not Shmini Atzeres. Atzeres in the Mishnah is Shavuos. Now the word Atzeres means conclusion. Why is Shavuos called the holiday of Atzeres? It is the completion of Pesach. Completion of Pesach. So why don't you start counting Domer the first day? So here the Meshech Chochmah does not address this, but I want to share with you a thought from Rav Nachman of Breslov, Likutei Maran, who brings this in the name of his great-grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. Rav Nachman was a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, where the Baal Shem Tov asks a very, very interesting question that maybe this will resonate with some of you. The Baal Shem Tov says we find that when a person is a chozer b'tshuva, a person comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with tshuva, there's a tremendous excitement and passion in all the mitzvahs that they do. Davening is beautiful and Shabbos is wonderful. And Birkas HaMazon is so inspiring. And there's such a love for every little bit of Torah that they learn and that they hear. It's like, Baruch Hashem, look at what I discovered. But then with the passage of time, a person sometimes loses their enthusiasm. Right? The person develops a routine, wrote, I don't enjoy it so much anymore. In fact, there's a whole genre of jokes. Kind of, how do you know when a Baal Tshuva is fully integrated in the Frum community? Right? Because you want to be integrated, right? You don't want people to look at you and say, oh, Baal Tshuva. So how do you know? So all of the jokes are the same way. Oh, when he benches in 2 minutes. When he talks during davening. You know, in other words, all of it means, oh, you've made it in the Frum world when you no longer care about all this stuff that much. Again, a kernel of truth in this. In fact, years ago, in Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York, which is very modern Orthodox show, I'm not endorsing that you go in, okay, but they have a very wonderful outreach program for many, many years. Rav Ephraim Buchwald, who's done this for more than 50 years. So they make a banquet every year. So this was a classic. I think you can get the speech on the internet. One of the honorees, who was very involved with Jewish outreach, made a speech, Why I Hate Balei Tshuva. It was a very affectionate speech. And he said, when I come home Friday night, I want to have a 15-minute meal and go to sleep. And right when I'm about to bench and do Shir HaMalos, this guy asked me, oh, can I ask you a question on Rashi in the Parsha? Or we didn't sing all the Zmiros. He says, they keep me up for 3 hours. But it was very affectionate. He was saying that, Baruch Hashem, you know. So the question is this. Why do we lose our passion? Why do we lose our excitement? Now, you may give me a pashut answer. Well, that's the nature of life. You do something over and over again, you know, it gets a little boring. But that can't be the pshat of a mitzvah. If every mitzvah I do and every learning I do brings me closer to Hashem, how is it shayach that there are diminishing returns? What? The more I do, the more I learn, the less connected I feel? That doesn't make sense. Maybe it makes sense for secular activities or something. But I'm building a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I get less out of it as I go on. This is the Baal Shem Tov's kasha. So the Baal Shem Tov gives a wonderful mashal of a baby learning to walk. Let's assume a baby is learning to walk. So initially the parents hold the baby's arms or hold the baby's shoulders, and the baby goes forward, 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 wobbly but going forward. And the baby enjoys the walking. The walking is great. At some point, the parents think the baby is ready to do it on his own. It's like taking the training wheels off a tricycle. So the parents let go. They're still there to catch the baby, but they let go. What's going to happen as soon as the baby lets go, as soon as the parents lets go, is the baby is going to plop down. Plop, 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 plop. Now, what is going to happen is no matter how many times the kid plops down, he'll get up again. That itself, by the way, this is another observation, but the Breitowitz says there is so much you can learn from a child learning how to walk. Because no matter how many times that kid falls down, they will pull themselves up. They don't give up. We are hardwired by HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to give up. If we give up because we get discouraged, that is a learned response. That is not our nature. Amazing thing. I mean, I remember when my son learned to crawl. This is before walking. So I remember it was so hard to crawl. He was like pulling himself on his stomach and he was grunting. And I was thinking to myself, you have a nice playpen. What are you doing? What is pushing you? Like to hurt yourself, to crawl. Amazing thing. What makes kids want to crawl, want to walk, want to stand up? Hashem put something in them that says, I got to accomplish, I got to grow, I got to go weiter. And they don't get discouraged no matter what. Amazing thing. Okay, that's the Breitowitz observation. But going back to the walking thing, if the child could articulate his or her thoughts, the child might wonder, why was walking so easy a minute ago? And now I'm falling down. Am I regressing? I'm 18 months, I'm regressing. What's going on? But what's the answer? The walking was easier because mom and dad were holding you up. But now, you have to take what they gave you and make it your own. And that's going to be more difficult. This is the Baal Shem Tov. Says the Baal Shem Tov. When a person is far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they have decided they want to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the distance is very, very great. So Hashem carries you, holds you up. You have the desire, He carries you. When He carries you, everything seems effortless, beautiful, bright, wonderful. At some point, Hashem says, I've shown you what you're able to accomplish, but now you have to accomplish it. I took you to the top of the mountain. I'm now putting you down. Now, when I have to go up that mountain, it may be laborious, it may be difficult, but ultimately I'm taking what Hashem showed me and making it His own, making it my own. Now yes, just like Abba and Ima are still there to pick up the baby, Hashem is always here. But He lets go a little bit. So we should internalize those madrigas. And this is why Rav Nachman concludes that when a person has what they might call a backsliding in their enthusiasm, counterintuitively, it is not a failure. It is a vote of confidence of Hashem that you're ready to handle this now. I'm letting go a little bit. It's no longer the artificial high. So the Baal Tanya, he doesn't give all of this background of the mashal, but the Baal Tanya says, this is the relationship between Shavuos, Pesach and Shavuos. Pesach, as we said before, is an unearned gift. And Hashem showed us madregos and ruchnias that were way beyond where we were. Enormous revelations. What do Chazal say? The lowly maidservant on the sea saw more than the Navi Yecheskel. Hashem lifted us up. But after he shows us what we can become, he puts us on the ground and says, climb the mountain a little bit at a time. So unlike Pesach, which is sudden revelation, Sfiras HaOmer is approaching God in steps, graduated, incremental steps, in which sometimes you go forward, or sometimes you go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and sometimes you go 1 step forward and 2 steps back. But you gotta keep going. And therefore, as the t-shirt saying says, what you are is God's gift to you, but what you do with what Hashem gave you is your gift back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Pesach, God carries us. Shavuos, we internalize what Hashem showed us is possible. And that is why Sfiras HaOmer is the day after Shabbos. Going back to the Meshech Chochmah, if Shabbos represents the gift that we haven't earned, and the first day of Pesach is that gift that we haven't earned, Omer is the next day, the next step. Mimacharas. It's a new situation. Mimacharas HaShabbos. Because now you're no longer dealing with what Hashem has given you. You're dealing with making this your own madrega. Right? And we see this in life all the time, that initially things might be made easier for us in many, many ways. But the real test of our growth is when we don't have the training wheels, or we don't have all of the crutches, right? Even making a laning, right? Although I do not have the fanatic negativity of art scrolls that apparently Ohr Somayach has, but nevertheless, the notion that, of course, it's much easier to learn things in translations, but the real test is when you struggle and you make it your own, and then it becomes your accomplishment, and then you give HaKadosh Baruch Hu nachas and pride in all that you've done. And this is the connection between Pesach, which is the matana, and Sfira, which is the graduated spiritual process, culminating in Shavuos. And this is why the counting of the Omer is Mimacharas HaShabbos, the day after Shabbos. It's the next step in our spiritual development. Okay, we'll stop here.